It is now time for our last and slightly special session. So if you noticed, I've kind of put on my moderator's hat for this one. And I have to say I'm a little bit to blame for this one because I really fought for having this very special session included. It's an unusual one because it looks at one development that to me was really the good news from the region in the last year. And I wanted to zoom into this development. Ever since we heard about the kind of new sense of entente between Korea and Japan and the subsequent trilateral meeting in August in Camp David, me and my colleague, the Korea chair, Ramon, have been plotting this. Say we need to bring the two ambassadors on stage and we need to talk about this because we think that the opportunities that this new kind of dynamic presents for the world, for the region, and for Europe are great. So thank you so much for playing along, for joining me on stage for this last special session. I'm more than pleased to introduce two ambassadors. His Excellency Ambassador Masahiro Mikami, the Ambassador of Japan to the Kingdom of Belgium, Luxembourg, and the mission to NATO.
Not Luxembourg.
Oh. I knew I was going to get something wrong. Sorry.
Another ambassador there.
My apologies. Ambassador Jeonghyun, you?
I'm covering Luxembourg.
And you have the, so I mixed it up. I'm sorry for that. So, Ambassador to Belgium, Luxembourg, and mission to NATO.
And European Union.
And European Union. All right, there's a charm, but Robert Pell doesn't have to.
I'm not ambassador anywhere.
You're not ambassador, but you used to be a very important, and you still are a very important person to us now at CSDS, but you were the former defense advisor of the United States at NATO and Assistant Secretary General under the two previous democratic administrations. So let me start with Ambassador Yu. Your government has been instrumental, really, last year in making the first move in facilitating a lot of this new dynamic, bilaterally and trilaterally. What is the current view from Seoul? What's your kind of overall assessment of this? Where do you rank the importance of this partnership? And where do you see the opportunities as well? What's next?
Can I use the mic? Is it okay? Yeah, okay. First of all, thank you so much, Eva. You excellently arranged the meeting, and I'm so happy to be here. This is so meaningful, the venue. Then, and also the nice meeting you, the Dr. Trauner, the new dean of the Brussels School of the Governance, and also my friend, Dr. Louis Simon. You organized an excellent event. Thank you so much. Yes, you rightly mentioned the Brussels, the Indo-Pacific dialogue is even more meaningful since this year the Belgium took up the presidency of the European Union, and also I'm so pleased to have an opportunity to have a discussion on the spirit of the Camp David trilateral summit meeting, which would play a role on important link in the Indo-Pacific cooperation. As you know, in August last year, the three leaders of Korea, the United States, and Japan met at Camp David, and they made an agreement which had an important meaning for regional and global stability. They adopted three important documents which would open a new era of trilateral partnership. One of these three documents was the joint statement which was named the Spirit of Camp David. The Spirit of Camp David is based on the inevitability of cooperation among the like-minded countries to face the unprecedented multiple crises, namely the climate change, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, and nuclear provocations. In particular, I'd like to highlight that Camp David summit brought about two important developments in the trilateral cooperation of US, Japan, Korea. First, institutionalization. Yes, in the past, the Korea, U.S., Japan, we had also the trilateral meetings and exchanges. However, the meetings were held irregularly, often on the sidelines of the multilateral conferences, and mainly focused on the North Korean issues. But during the Camp David summit, the three leaders agreed on holding regular trilateral meetings at various levels involving leaders, foreign ministers, trade ministers, and also the defense chiefs. And the second, the comprehensiveness, beyond some limited security issues, such as DPLK, I mentioned before. The scope of trilateral cooperation will include sharing cutting-edge technology, joint development, healthcare, and people-to-people exchanges. Following the Camp David summit, progress is underway in implementing the agreements, such as meeting among three leaders on the sideline of APEC summit, and 2 times a foreign ministers meeting, and a recent national security advisors meeting, and lots of meetings, and also operationalizing the real-time sharing of DPLK missile warning data. Recently, the North Korea, they launched so many missiles and lots of things. As recent, the Korea, U.S., Japan, Indo-Pacific dialogue at deputy minister level shows the three countries are seeking for ways to contribute to regional stability along with Southeast Asian and Pacific Island partners. I'd like to add the one more thing, then regarding the perspective of what's going on and what will forward. And the ROK, US, Japan, the three most advanced liberal democracies and economic powers in the region share limitless potential for cooperation in many areas. As you know, the three countries are among the only 7 nations globally with a per capita GDP exceeding $30,000 and a population of over 50 million. We are at the forefront of advancing advanced technology and scientific innovation, making us optimal partners for shared prosperity and future growth. Expanding collaboration among the three countries in source technologies such as artificial intelligence, AI, quantum, 6G, semiconductors, and secondary batteries can secure momentum for future growth. We will address the climate crisis by strengthening cooperation in carbon reduction and clean energy technology. We will also further our cooperation to counter the manipulation of information around the world, forms of fake news that undermine the basis of our democracy. Starting from this year, the three countries are members of the UN Security Council. In this regard, we will strengthen coordination and cooperation within the Security Council to address regional and global issues. The trilateral cooperation does not exclude any specific nations and pursues inclusive cooperation open to participation of all countries. It aims to advance the security and prosperity not only of the region, but also of the world. Today, when security and prosperity are closely intertwined all over the world, we need tight cooperation with all partner states to strengthen rule-based international order. In this sense, cooperation with the European Union and the NATO is simply inevitable. At conclusion, for my presentation, the Korea and the NATO and the European Union have upgraded the mutual relations. Actually, we celebrated the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations with the European Union last year. And also regarding the NATO, my president attended the 2 years consecutively the NATO summit meeting in Madrid and Vilnius, And also we have the permanent mission, we opened permanent mission of NATO in 2022. So having said that, the recent visit of Korea and Japan, some of the NATO, the permanent representatives, including the US ambassador to the NATO, also serves as an extension of our trilateral cooperation. I'm very optimistic that this engagement will significantly contribute fostering cooperation and solidarity among partners dedicating uphold rule-based international order. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you for your optimism, and I think that's founded because, as you say, both with the EU and with NATO, there is the work is really just beginning, and there's much more we can do, and that we're trying to do also with Japan, and for which this format can be very useful. So let me now turn to the Japanese perspective with Ambassador Mikami, if that's possible. What is the view from Tokyo, and where do you see also from your position in Brussels, where do you see some of the concrete opportunities that Ambassador you already slightly alluded to?
Thank you. Thank you, Eva, for your kind introduction. And I'd like to express my appreciation for the efforts of the CSDS organizing this important dialogue, putting Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific perspective squarely in the policy dialogue of European security. And I'm very happy to be with such distinguished panelists, Dr. Robert Bell, who is a very senior former Assistant Secretary General of NATO, and with Ambassador Ryu of South Korea. If this had been 4 or 5 years ago, it wouldn't have been difficult for us to sit in such a relaxed manner next to each other. Maybe we would have probably declined the invitation to come here together. The situation between ROK and Japan was always difficult, not easy because of our history. There are sensitive, difficult issues. There have been always sensitive and difficult issues. But particularly until the present administration took office 2 years ago, in the previous 5 years or so was particularly difficult time. And I was in Tokyo at the time, and I left Tokyo in 2019. So at that time, to be frank, our relations were hit the bottom and very, very difficult. And it was so difficult to advance any positive agenda of cooperation between South Korea and Japan and for the region. So today I'm very pleased that we have invited to share with this very positive assessment of our cooperation, which has certainly important in itself for bilateral cooperation, but it's important implications, ramifications for the regional security as well as for the world and European security, I would say. As has been already said, this was made possible by the bold decision, courageous decision by President Yoon in March 2 years ago. So, you know, since 2018, when the Supreme Court of ROK made certain decision, followed by lower court decisions to order Japanese companies, private companies, to pay some money compensation for their workers, previous workers, which date back to more than 70 years ago. That created a very, very difficult obstacle between the two countries. Japan could never accept that because we thought that can destroy the legal foundation of Japan-ROK framework relations, which was set in 1965 by Japan-ROK Basic Agreement as well as Claims Agreement. But anyway, the obstacle was so formidable, but because of the decision of the Korean government and our joint efforts of two governments, since 2 years ago, the relations has improved significantly, and I'm very, very pleased by this. I really appreciate the efforts of my colleagues on both sides, as well as the great help coming from the United States and from other partners. And this paved the way. This was important in itself, but paved the way for enhanced Japan ROK US cooperation. And our leaders met for the first time in nearly 5 years in June 2022, 2 years ago in June in Madrid on the sidelines of NATO summit. Because for the first time, IP4 leaders were invited to attend NATO summit in Madrid 2 years ago. And it was followed by the meetings in Cambodia in November on the occasion of ASEAN-related meetings. And I happened to be there as ambassador to Cambodia, Japan's ambassador to Cambodia, observed this second summit meeting of 3 leaders. By the way, at that time, a few days before the summit meeting, Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, and China launched missiles into the surrounding area of Taiwan, and even several missiles came into Japanese EZ, very close to our islands. So it was very tense, but anyway, 3 leaders met, and also followed by in Hiroshima in May, at the time of the G7 summit last year. And then came this famous Camp David trilateral meeting in August last year, which Ambassador Liu had already explained. This summit was historic in the sense that it was the first ever standalone meeting. As Ambassador Liu had said, in the past, the first trilateral summit was held in 1994, I think. But it's been always irregularly organized on the margins of international meetings. Our relations were not easy, so that when our relations are difficult, you all know that it's difficult to set up an independent bilateral meeting. And we always use international conferences or meetings on the sidelines to set up bilateral meetings. So in the past, we set up trilateral summit meetings on the sidelines, but this Camp David was the first time that our leaders, 3 leaders, met independently as a standalone summit meeting. And as Ambassador Liu had said, looking at the history, from the beginning, this trilateral summit focused mainly on how we can cope with the challenges and threats coming from North Korea, focused on cooperation regarding North Korea. But this time, as has been explained by Ambassador Liu, this area of cooperation has been expanded dramatically to include not only North Korea. North Korea remains to be one of the main points, but also we have included in the documents, if you look at the documents, the Camp David principles and the joint statement, the spirit of Camp David, you will be impressed by this really comprehensive wide coverage of cooperation in many fields, including security. North Korea, it talks about China, but also economic securities, science and technology, and so many things. Now, so I think the potential of our 2 countries, together with the US, have been kind of quite released for the future cooperation for the region, for the world. This is very good, I should say. And yes, Ambassador Liu has talked about the economic positions, economic status of our economies, per capita income, and also population. If we add up the GDPs of 3 countries, unfortunately, the economic share of Japanese GDPs and probably Korean GDPs in the world, total GDP have been declining, but still, I think if we add up the GDPs of US, Japan, South Korea, it accounts for about 1/3 of the world GDP still. World GDP, there are several figures, but I think it now stands at 100 trillion US dollars. US accounts for 25 trillion dollars, and Japan 4.2 or 3, and Korea 1.6 or 7. So together it's 32 or something trillion US dollars. So it's 1/3 of the world GDP, and we have technologies. And so if we can work together for the stability and prosperity of the region and for the world, that can create a great force. And but as I said in the past, it was not possible because of the difficult bilateral relations. And of course, I think we cannot be totally optimistic, because as neighbors, we have many problems stemming from long history, cooperation, but also problems. But I think there are good reasons to be more optimistic about the future. If we look at the younger generations compared with older generations, I feel they have mutual affection, culture, K-pop, Japanese anime, and they are very much interested, and we receive so many Korean tourists, and Japanese tourists go to ROK in large numbers as well. So compared with older generations, we see quite optimistic. I see quite a good sign of improving relations. But still, as I said, we have to be careful. Of course, there will be, I'm sure there will be ups and downs. But I hope the general overall trend will be upwards and will not go back to the past. Time is limited, so I shouldn't speak very much. But talking about cooperation with partners, of course, in Indo-Pacific, we don't have NATO, we don't have EU, we don't have OSCE. Instead, ASEAN has been playing a very important role by providing a fora for dialogue and cooperation involving partner countries. Therefore, ASEAN, ASEAN is very important, and this, I think, this Camp David principles and joint statement both refer to the importance of unity and centrality of ASEAN, as well as the importance of ASEAN-related architecture. So ASEAN is very important, and I said our combined GDP accounts for 1/3, but the portion is declining, and the growing portion goes for ASEAN countries and also to other so-called global South countries. So we have to establish a good relationship with those countries, G7 or Japan, US, Korea, and European Union. We are still very influential in the world, but increasingly the power, economic power, is divided, shared by other countries. So I think we always have in mind those countries in so-called in the middle, so-called in the global south. And also in Asia-Pacific, apart from ASEAN, we have many newly established groupings, smaller groupings of dialogue and cooperation, such as Quad and multiple mini-lateral cooperation groups. And as I have been saying, this strong Japan-US ROK relationship is good not only for Indo-Pacific, but for the world, including Europe, I'm sure, because both Japan and Korea have been against the aggression by Russia of Ukraine from the beginning, and we have been quite a lot to help Ukraine against this illegal aggression, and thereby trying to preserve the rule-based international order as much as possible. So we are trying to be helpful for European security as well. But as has been mentioned several times, the securities between Europe and East Asia or Indo-Pacific are increasingly intertwined. Our Prime Minister has famously said that what is happening in Ukraine today could be tomorrow's East Asia. And this is partly our reason, not that everything, but part of the reason why we are so serious in opposing the illegal aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and we are so serious in trying to be helpful for the Ukrainian efforts to defend its country. And we are very pleased that Korea and Japan are working in the same direction as two of the advanced liberal democratic countries in Asia. Not only by ourselves, but also in the context of IP4 with NATO. President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida have participated in the NATO summit 2 times, 2 years in succession. And we have also agreed upon our respective comprehensive program of cooperation called ITPP with NATO. So I think we can build upon our program of cooperation with NATO, bilaterally with NATO, but also as partners in these IP4 countries. So I think time is limited, so I should stop here.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. You have managed together to cover an incredibly large, actually, ground, including mentioning the importance of people-to-people connection as one of the kind of future solutions, which I think is extremely important to remind. And the fact that this formation is not about just the military or security cooperation. It is economic. It is about the new technologies that Ambassador Yu also mentioned. So clearly the potential capital that is there is enormous. But if I would pick up on some of the things that you mentioned at the end, is this trilateral cooperation or Camp David formation as a segment, as an element of an emerging regional security architecture. And we have mentioned AUKUS quite extensively this morning, which is yet another one, quite in a very kind of different way, perhaps. What would be, where would Robert actually place this element viewed from the US interest or / NATO's interest? How do you see a particular use of this trilateral cooperation in the emerging regional security architecture?
Well, let me suggest three points in the Camp David Accord, which is extremely important, where I think there are opportunities to broaden the implementation beyond the trilateral focus and bring in this interconnectiveness we've been discussing all day between Europe and the Indo-Pacific regions. The first has to do with the appeal in the Camp David Accord for the complete denuclearization of the peninsula and the calling on all Security Council, all members of the UN to enforce the resolutions. And it's really extraordinary when you look into this. There are 10 sanctions resolutions in place in the UN Security Council, each of which was unanimously approved, which means including by Russia. Now, why does this matter? Well, since October, there's been a major development, noted, by the way, by the ministers when they met trilaterally 3 weeks ago as a follow-up to the accord, and that is the growing strategic partnership between North Korea and Russia. The New York Times just this week had a very long article cataloging this increased military cooperation, talking about 1 million tons of ammunition that the Russians have provided, that the North Koreans have provided Russia to prosecute the war against Ukraine, and upwards of 50 modern ballistic missiles. So the idea that there's a sanctions regime in place seems very relevant. The second factor that's new since August is that South Korea and Japan, as Ambassador Ryu noted, are on the Security Council for 2024. And that means they're also members, because all Security Council members are members of this 1718, this UN Security Council Resolution 1718, that's the enforcement committee for these sanctions. And not only are they on that committee, but South Korea and Japan are co-chairs, co-vice chairs of the enforcement committee. So it seems to me there's a real opportunity here, not just between the United States, South Korea, and Japan on this 1718 committee, but to bring in the other two members of the so-called P3. When I worked at the White House, when there was a major issue, whether it was negotiation of the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty or the Chemical Weapons Treaty or anything else, we always started with a P3 consultation. Later, of course, you brought in Germany and many other allies, but the P3 is sort of the core leadership function, both in terms of the UN Security Council and, frankly, at NATO, particularly on nuclear-related matters, since the P3 are all nuclear powers. So it seems to me, first recommendation, there's a real opportunity here in this 1718 committee for South Korea and Japan, working with the United States, France, and the UK, the P3, to really hammer this point home. Do a Adlai Stevenson kind of Cuban Missile Crisis show and tell with pictures and declassified intel that lays out the extent to which Russia is violating the sanctions resolutions on North Korea that it has voted for 10 times. Okay, point two. The Camp David Accord calls for deeper cooperation in ballistic missile defense. And indeed, since August, there have been some very good trilateral exercises. I would suggest going one step further. NATO has a phenomenal maritime TMD exercise called Formidable Shields. I don't know who picks these names, but that's the name of it. Formidable Shields. They just finished one last summer. 3 weeks, 13 countries, 20 ships, over 25 different live fire engagement, using the kinds of ships and the kinds of data sharing that are at the heart of the Camp David Agreement. I'm talking about live firing with incoming missiles against Aegis-class destroyers. So I would strongly recommend that South Korea and Japan consider using their most modern Aegis-equipped ships to participate in Formidable Shields when it takes place in 2025. The next one, they're already beginning to plan it, which will include most NATO allies. Why? The reason is because North Korea, according to the Sanctions Committee, has tested about 25 ballistic missiles in the last year. There's a reason they're firing these off. They're firing them off to test how to evade the missile defenses in the region. So it's very important if those same ballistic missiles are now going to be in the Russian inventory, facing prospectively the Baltic states or Poland and not just Ukraine, that we learn from you what you're learning and what the trilateral grouping in the Indo-Pacific is practicing in terms of track, detection, and data sharing. We can share our capabilities because we are now confronting the same missiles in both regions. That bridge has been built. And then last but not least, and this is very short, I would note that the Camp David Accord endorsed putting pressure on China to comply with the law of the sea principles for free navigation and not using force for territorial gain. And here I'll call in an airstrike on the US's own position and suggest diplomatically that perhaps South Korea and Japan could put some pressure on the United States, maybe joined by pressure from NATO allies who have ratified the Law of the Seas Treaty, to get the United States to ratify the Law of the Seas Convention. It's incomprehensible to me that a treaty that was negotiated and renegotiated by a Republican president, Ronald Reagan, is still sitting in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee waiting for a vote. Although, to our credit, we've observed it informally for the last 40 years.
Thank you so much, Robert. And I feel absolutely terrible for cutting this session shorter, but we have just been informed that the Prime Minister of Belgium is actually waiting in the corridor for the next 2 minutes. So I'm very, very sorry for having to cut this session short. I wish we had more time for Q&A, but now it is my utmost pleasure, of course, to welcome our guest of... Oh, yeah, no, sorry. So we will have to leave the stage. Sorry. Let us leave the stage. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.